Okay. Maybe we can have a recording that doesn't have someone blasting fireworks outside my window. It's it's still like 24th of June, not even close to the 4th of July. And I thought it was the neighbors just being loud and annoying. No, it was some professionals. Anyways, we're here to talk about how we've balanced shogi versus chess, and this one is actually really simple. How we've done it. There's not a whole lot of weird intricacies we have to talk about, other than the interactions that this has with different other armies, because other pieces needed certain rules about their drops. But it matches a pretty consistent way. Hold on. That's not supposed to be blue. At least not yet. So this matchup is interesting because you can't precisely use the material values that chess players are known for, but they still matter, and I'll get into it. First things first, special shout out to Discord user Gluttony Main for making this lovely web application, which works exceptionally well. It has no rule enforcement, so it lets me just move things around and talk about them very easily. It does also allow people to play against each other. We use it on the Discord all the time until we finish our web app. Which, by the way, right now we are having to either code or find an open source JavaScript Beta notation parser. So if anyone has some information about that, please leave a comment down below. I would greatly appreciate it. Also, special shout out to the Shogi Harbor community for helping me figuring out what did and did not work, especially Carolina herself. She has been a great help, as well as Discord user Lily Lionmane for being a strong youth player who repeatedly kicks my ass over and over again and then tells me how shogi works. uh, I do enjoy getting my ass kicked by I'm pretty sure they're between 9 and 15. But they're much stronger than me, and honestly, their opinions, while controversial and very, forward, have been invaluable in figuring out how to make this feel like shogi. Now, I do assume that you know how to play chess, Western chess. I do assume that you know how to play Japanese shogi. If you don't know how to do either of those things, go learn the games now. And then, once that's done, let's begin. I'm just going to show you. This is how we've balanced this matchup. So, as you can see, you only had to add a few pieces in hand, and I'll explain why we chose these specific pieces and how we intend to mess with it. And it's actually really funny, because if you understand the basic rules of our game as well as chess, you already have a pretty decent idea of how this is going to go. First of all, those of you who watched our video about Shang-Chi being put into this already know that we have something called battlefield movements, which matters quite a bit for preventing things from getting stuck, and is also it's a little far-reaching right now because we're kind of experimenting with it because it feels good for the game, and even though we very much try to be true to the base games, if something shows promise for being a net positive strategically, then we will potentially embrace it. Case in point, castling, we have a slightly more flexible rule set, which doesn't rely on the king and rook having moved or not previously in the game or having castled before. So you don't have to keep track of any of that extra outside information. You could just look at the board state, and if they're spaced properly, they can castle. And that includes like vertically and all over the board. But some of these are experiments, and if we find that they are bad for the game or that the community doesn't like them, they will be removed. We do have some very strong opposition to that among the current long-term players, but I want to be clear, if it's bad for the game, we will remove omni-castling from the chess army. Okay? Another point is that the battlefield movements for the pawns don't have to be as flexible as they are, being that the pawns are able to non-capture move sideways as long as they're in this blue area. It really only has to happen when they reach the edge. So here, this pawn, it has to be able to move sideways here. It doesn't have to be able to move sideways here, and certainly this one doesn't have to be able to move sideways here. But in order for our battlefield system to work, which allows us to do things like this, it does need to happen somewhere, and that would be here. Luckily, crossing the moat meant it was unnecessary for Shang-Chi, but let's talk more about Shogi again. Okay. So, I mentioned earlier that the material value didn't quite matter, but it doesn't in the way that a chess brain would think, because you never get to a normal endgame, which that's how the piece value is calculated. It measures up what pieces can beat what in most scenarios in an endgame. So 3 pawns is roughly equivalent to a bishop in the right positions in an endgame. 5 pawns can be roughly equivalent to a rook in most of the right positions in an endgame, right? 2 rooks are able to counter and work against a queen in a proper endgame. And the same goes for 3 minors. Properly coordinated, they can properly fight a queen in an endgame, which is why those values are similar. However, Shogi is a drop game, and despite how simple the final rule set is, the fact that it's a drop game hasn't been the kindest to us. So we've tried a lot of things. The first thing we tried was only Shogi getting the drops against everybody. That was a terrible idea, because they could trade anything, right? They just throw their bishop in, they get a knight in hand, you take it, you get nothing back, they drop the knight. Oh, I'm the Shogi player, and I kill again. So we tried to tie it to just the Shogi pieces, and we made it 2 ways. So if you killed a Shogi piece, you would get that back too. But it turned out that even that, there was a very common sequence of trades that you could capitalize on, where you made the even trade, you used the piece you got to make an uneven trade, and then you made another even trade. And constantly doing that back and forth would give you a material advantage that's basically unavoidable. So that didn't work. For a while, we back when we weren't trying to keep the game feel of Shogi as pure as we ended up getting it to, we tried buffing pieces like the battlefield movement. Oh, I haven't talked about Shogi battlefield movements yet. All right, let's do that. So despite the fact that we currently have a battlefield movement, which is a non-capturing sidestep on pieces that can get stuck, of which there are 3 in Shogi, Nifu still applies. So you can't go here unless this guy dies. But if this guy's dead, you can absolutely sidestep. Nifu only applies to the Shogi pawns and not to these. So if you get 4 of these in hand and you want to just go doot 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 or doot doot, you can. I'll explain why this didn't apply later. And that's for the lance as well. It's got a 1 square sidestep on the battlefield at the moment, so you could do this if you wanted to. Same for the knight. For obvious reasons, it would just be stuck, and so it's able to sidestep once it's on the battlefield. And that is the only movement buff that we've done. But we have tried making them able to move and capture sideways. We have tried making this a full knight on the battlefield. We've made this a full rook on the battlefield before. We've made both of these pieces into full kings on the battlefield before. Yeah. And those didn't feel like shogi and didn't work well. It made the army too strong, too defensive. It made it possible for you to make impenetrable fortresses. We didn't even used to have Nifu still apply, but it turns out just you need Nifu to avoid making impenetrable fortresses. It turns out. Yes, Liam?
Do you have drugs?
No.
For the pain?
There's ibuprofen in the cabinet on the far right side of the kitchen.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. That's staying in. I'm not cutting that out.
Okay. Do you have crack?
No.
God damn it. Okay.
Typical. If he gets canceled one day, just don't cancel me with him, please. So, hold on. I actually need my brain to pause and process that for a moment. Moment over. So that's one thing. We have these have the battlefield movement. God damn it, this is already so scuffed. Pieces in hand are worth more than pieces on the board. And that sounds obvious when I say it, but it means that this lance is not just a lance. It's a lance that one time will be able to teleport anywhere. So having these be in hand at the start of the game matters a lot. It also means you kind of skip a very basic phase of shogi where nobody has pieces in hand, and you are constantly, if you're playing this game, from the position where the opponent has more material on the board, but you have resources in hand and your opponent doesn't, which is a very specific situation that happens in shogi. And other situations can arise out of this because of that, but it affects the opening greatly. So, that being said, let's talk about the drop restrictions. The pawns only have one drop restriction. They cannot be dropped inside of the enemy's camp. So you can use them defensively. You can stack as many of them as you want. If the enemy's king is in the middle, they can be dropped to deliver checkmate. That's the only restriction. And that's because the pawn's promotion to a queen is too strong. You're also allowed, keep in mind, because we wanted to be flexible, to put the pawns on the first rank of your army. And I do believe, let me verify, that the pawns do not get a double step after being dropped, or it's true that they get a double step on the first and second rank. So let me check the rulebook real quick. Nope, that's party mode. Movement clarification. The followed pieces have special case movements on the first turn, which they can only use after being dropped if they were dropped on the first or second rank inside the controlling player's territory. Medieval pawns, Spartan hoplites. Correct. Okay. So the pawns, if they are captured, you put them in hand, and then you subsequently drop them. In fact, let me just clear this out a little bit so that I can demonstrate this with vigor and gusto. So this pawn is allowed to double step, and this pawn is allowed to double step, and both of these were valid drops. But the pawn when dropped here, that, like, if you take it in hand and drop it here, it's on the third rank, it's not able to double step, it can only single step. Cool. So, I think that's just about everything. You'll notice that this soldier in hand is blue. It's actually the tactician or officer. Both are valid translations for what it is and what it does. And it is just a normal pawn, except that it ignores Nifu and Ushifuzume. So it can be dropped to mate the enemy king, and it alone can be dropped on the same file as another pawn. It actually has a different kanji that we have made. We haven't finished all of the kanji for this piece, but we do have the 1 and 2 kanji for it. I found that out in a previous video. So here's the 1 kanji for the officer. Let me zoom in. Here is the promoted officer for the 1 kanji. Here is the 2 kanji officer. And here is the promoted 2 kanji officer. And we do have different looks for all of the promotions, of course, as we should. But that even includes between the different kanjis for the promotions. You can see they're very similar, but they're not exactly the same. Another thing to note, since we actually are looking close up at our pieces for a moment, all of our art that we are using for pieces is 128 by 128 pixel art, and we intend to keep it that way. And that will also allow us eventually to open the doors for people to upload their own arts for either their custom variants on our website or to potentially give to other people / market to other people on the website. And we're still trying to balance people being able to make and show their own piece arts, and then also people being able to turn off looking at their opponent's pretty pieces, as well as proper moderation for all of that. But what can you do? It's gonna take a while before we allow that, since it's not even playable yet. But it is an intended feature, and that's why the art is currently universalized like this. Believe it or not, this is really close to balanced with just these 4 in hand. Let's talk about why we couldn't put this in hand, or this in hand, or this in hand, or this in hand. And it becomes really obvious when you think about it more, but a lot of it comes down to the fact that you're not just facing the chess army and certain really key weak points. So, first of all, if we gave any of these 3 in hand, this would be a massive blunder and a massive mistake, because you could just drop the gold, drop the silver, drop the bishop there. And it would just instantly destroy the chess army. So we couldn't give those in hand for that reason. And that would apply to not just those squares, but also to an extent these ones as well. The weak point on the king and this one. And it's particularly bad if it's a fork, because if let's show one of the other armies real quick. Let me pull out, say, yeah, let's pull out Empire from Empire Chess, made by Discord user Couch Tomato, Daniel Lee of Pie Chess fame, and also the one who designed the international set that we ended up basing our models on. You'll immediately notice that there's a lot of open territory back here. And if you ever get an anchor at all and have a general in hand, you're probably going to be able to fork 2 or 3 of these pieces out of the opening and up trade in a massive way. So having easy forks is another thing we had to avoid. We haven't avoided it perfectly, like doing this on turn 1 is still a mistake, even here, because of that knight drop. But, you know, it is notable. If you aren't familiar with this variant, I do suggest you look it up. It's pretty fun. You'll notice that there are some differences between our army and that one just at a glance, but more than likely those differences will be relatively negligible by the end of the development process. We are consulting the original creator of this army on a regular basis anytime we're making changes. I'm probably going to review or interview them about this particular army when I get to that point. All right. Is there anything else I need to talk about? Not particularly. Shogi and chess have the same king. The mating patterns that work on them are very similar. One important thing to note about the matchup: the chess army's king safety is super low compared to this one. He's got the 4 amigos here to help him out. He's able to move them and him around. He's able to create these nearly impenetrable fortresses in the corner. Meanwhile, White's offensive power out of the opening does somewhat compensate that, but any attacks you do will also loosen your defenses. So because you have so much trouble as White making a fortress, giving up any of these pieces puts you in huge danger from any threats. And that... it creates really sharp middle games, which of course Shogi is known for, but even more so here with the heavy pieces and the extra stuff, you don't have that slow build-up. The only slow build-up you have is the fact that very often you will be forced to make some combination of 2 to 4 of the moves that I just put arrows up on the screen, just to defend on really fast attacks that can come out of just out of what the opponent has available to them. Notably, I need to show you that not all of our battlefields are 2 across. There are several that are 3 across, which gives you a more normal spacing on the pawns to reach the opponent, and also gives a more difficult spacing for knights and pawns to work together in the attack on Shogi. Another important part of that is the player going second always chooses that battlefield. So take that as you will. I don't think I have anything else to add. Changing the movements of Shogi pieces in ways that doesn't match the base game didn't feel like Shogi. Doing any sort of other buffs just didn't feel like Shogi. But it turns out just giving them 4 pieces in hand that are relatively weak, but that if utilized properly make a massive difference, is enough. Exactly how enough it is, we'll wait and see. Right now, we went with one of each of the options, and it feels pretty good. But feeling pretty good in shogi and actually being balanced are very different things because of how much a small difference in skill level between the two players and can affect the outcome of things like material differences. It's why shogi is playable with odds and is done so at the professional level. So, like, if you have a massive skill difference, you could drop all of these pieces and just be fighting the opponent with pawns and generals, and they're probably going to beat you. And that might be affecting our ability to tell. But as far as we can tell, this is enough right now. There was another part to that I wanted to say. Oh, yeah. Because you have so many moves, it makes it a lot harder to do human balance testing. Because normally what we do is we take players that are around 1500 to 2000 or greater, but 1500 is the baseline because most of the dev team is at least that strong. And we have them able to discuss their moves with each other, able to look at the board from both sides and alternate out, have other people contribute, including other strong players or stronger players, sit down, able to take back any move. And the whole process can take hours and hours and hours because basically we're trying to build out theory and artificially raise our ELO to play and balance test this because we've been slowly seeing progress on Fairy Stockfish being able to play this, but it isn't yet. I'm looking forward to being able to engine balance this. But humans testing does have to come first. Because otherwise it'll just feel terrible and technically be balanced. Or we'll just accidentally make a completely different game, which we've done before. I think I'm going to start rambling if I go any further, if I haven't been already. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to join the Discord. It's in the description down below, as is the rulebook. And be kind to each other. Bye for now.